How's it going, people? Jack here with another video. This is day 3 post-release of Dragon's Dogma 2, and I was originally thinking of making a day 1 experience of this video game. And this is how you kill a lich. Yep, not that difficult to do. But that will have to wait because I wanted to share my impressions of this game as I have yet to complete it. I still have managed to play the equivalent of what, 15 hours of this. And I'm coming with this angle because this is, I would suppose, the amount of time that the average consumer would have spent, like day-to-day worker, like a 9-to-5 worker, should I rather say, or a student. Now, obviously, there are a little bit of different circumstances depending on who you are, but I have still managed to play and experience a lot of the content of the game enough to the point where even my brain refused to give me more narcoleptic attacks. So, to say the least, I have had a blast with this so far, yet some obvious concerns about the game's performance and the introduction of some last-minute surprise mechanics, thank you EA, I will never let that meme die, has gotten a lot of people angry, to the point where that anger has turned the conversation regarding these things into a game of telephone, where the would-be correction of certain points here has turned into misinformation, and what was initially constructive criticism has now turned into outright name-calling and personal attacks.
Well, that's fucked up in all kinds of ways now, isn't it?
Now, was I surprised that Capcom would introduce some microtransaction into this game? A bit, but not really, because this is Capcom we are talking about. Yes, they have indeed improved over the years. They are a far cry from what they were in 2012 and early 2010s, when they made all of the wrong decisions. Think of Ultimate Marvel 3, Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, Street Fighter 5, DMC Devil May Cry. Isn't that right, El Dante?
It really is you?
Espera, ¿quién dices que eres?
My name is Virgil.
What is that?
Now, that game did have some redeeming qualities, but as they redeemed themselves with the many bangers and quite literally overwhelmingly positive title that they've been putting out there, notice one thing that kept on being there consistently: microtransactions and DRMs. Oh yes, they have never left it be. For Capcom, easily as it is for Nintendo to hate on fan-made project, this is business as usual. It doesn't mean that it is right that they are doing this, okay, don't misconstrue my words, but they've always done this. Like, have you visited the store page of the overwhelmingly positive tax evasion simulator that is Devil May Cry 5?
You're gonna pay, Virgil.
Let me be clear, Dante. I will never pay.
It's at least $100 of additional content's worth. Like, name a Street Fighter game, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil Village,
Bruh.
Monster Hunter. It's the true religious experience. What I'm trying to say is that coming into this game, I kind of knew what I was in for. I had played the original and I had an idea that, yes, they are modernizing a certain title that is over a decade old. They're gonna introduce some things here. This did obviously not stop me from also complaining about these things and being taken aback a little bit. I did make my frustration known during a stream on Friday, to the point where I even quit the game outright and decided to play The Witcher 3 instead. This should not be an issue. Okay? Performance should not be an issue. Okay, I'm gonna turn the game off. Let me see if we can do a little bit of comparison here. This is running. Like, there are visual improvements somewhat, a tiny bit, on Geralt's character, but this is just the way that it was in 2017, and this could be running on a low-end device. But whether you are in the no microtransaction camp, as it incentivizes companies to keep pushing half-baked games with predatory practices, or in the low beta days when we got additional content by grinding, but it's okay because most of these are easily accessible as they aren't game-breaking camp. Yeah, it's a very long title. It is still worth having a conversation about because microtransactions do indeed mean different things for different people. It's a far more nuanced thing than just to say WRONG! P.S. Regarding the whole personal attack situation that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, as I was about to literally upload this thing, I stumbled on a video by Johs Response, who was talking about what microtransactions truly are, or at least what pay to win is. And to that, he had to follow up with a response video from a small little bit of segments from the video that had to deal with Dragon's Dogma 2. Now, his video had something a lot more to do with the psychology of the thing, but his response was all about this very thing of people taking things a bit too far when it comes to what should have been constructive criticism. Since this part is talking about nuance, I think that it might be a great thing to go and listen to a guy who I think has had a lot more experience with a much greater variety of games than I have, and I think it's a good content creator. Please give those video a watch. But dirt and grime aside, to the game proper, what is it like to play Dragon's Dogma 2? It's amazing. This game is an overall improvement on Dragon's Dogma 1 in every way. When it comes to the discussion on games such as this one, you are kind of bound to sometimes make comparison. And while it initially might have left a sour taste in some people's mouths, I think that DD2 is likely to be one of those games that gets heralded as being one of the greatest RPGs of all times, right there next with Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3. And this is seen right off of the character creation. That allowed me at least to do a little bit of self-insert in here, as was made pretty apparent through the character creator demo that was put out some days earlier. And I absolutely love how you don't even need to choose some of the established races to create a monstrosity of your choosing. It's super in-depth and all you need is creativity. When it comes to the story though, this is where it got really interesting, because if you've read any of the novels, played the initial game, or by a weird misstep tumbled into Netflix's anime category and watched that horrid show.
Brother, what's that?
Just a dream.
You will know of the cyclical nature of Dragon's Dogma story. You are the Arisen, the champion, the true sovereign, and pawns will be subject to your servitude. But toss in a dash of amnesia, a curse, slavery, and you being treated as a pawn, the beefiest of pawns, mind you, you have a cocktail for something that is quite interesting. And obviously I'm not going to be spoiling anything here as I haven't yet reached the end of the game. The way that they wrap up the intro and manage to somewhat subvert my expectations with new story beats. Oh shit. And then the dragon spoke Latin. Raid Shadow Legends. Now that's cool. It's something that I just really like, and the story is much more easier to follow, which is not initially a complaint, right? Complexity in storytelling is fine with me. I play the Souls games after all, but in contrast to the previous game, which, like my habit to never clear up my backlog, kept most of the important things at the end, I much prefer the way that this one is structured. Also, I did mention Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3 as games that I would like to compare this one to. But let me clarify something, this is merely on the merit of them being good overall RPGs. They are not the same thing. They each come from a different school of thoughts. Even The Witcher 3 that I briefly replayed there has its roots from a different structure. While they all, to some extent, have a basis in an open world that makes use of emergent mechanics to urge the player to approach things in a multitude of ways and rewards building a character with a specific set of skills that in turn pursues a unique path through the game, the Western RPGs, for a lack of specification here, has always followed and have focused on the branching narrative paths. With so much focus on it, in fact, that certain games can be beat without a single combat encounter. That's what you get with CRPGs like Baldur's Gate. Whereas JRPGs used to, they are changing over the years, just look at the Persona series, but it used to be a lot more linearly structured with low customization, player agency, and a mandatory killing of gods. No, like seriously, name 5 JRPGs where you do not kill gods. I'll wait. No, seriously, you do that a lot. Okay, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked here. What I'm trying to get at here is that if you have yet to get into the game, please do expect a strong narrative, but not necessarily the multiple branching paths that you would have seen through the decision makings of, let's say, titles like Baldur's Gate or The Witcher. JRPGs were built by companies that were of course also inspired by a similar foundation with the likes of D&D, Wizardry and so on. But they have always had a tradition of a strong narrative that ends up being very cinematic in comparison to some of the Western one, but despite you being the protagonist, you are not exactly in the driver's seat. It's more like on the passenger seat where you are following along with a story. And yes, your actions do affect certain things, but you aren't shaping the story yourself, if that makes sense. So story-wise, do not judge the story in comparison to others, perhaps to the first one, because I think it's a much greater improvement, but judge this for what it is. And what it is an amazing open world filled with combat encounters and emergent gameplay that got me playing for 5 hours straight while I was holding my bladder and sweating from the fear of falling all the time. And the thing that makes the gameplay so much fun are the vocations. They've been upgraded with specialization this time. I'm gonna save the details for my review, but the thing that I appreciated quite a bit was a lot more focus on the pawns this time. They have a way more enjoyable AI to converse with, the things that they do during battles are just amazing, and now they level just like yourself, with even quest specific things that they can do to earn them some XP and also give you like a seal of approval. I have tried changing into almost all of the vocations, and what I can tell you is that if you want to cheese through the game, at least in the early level, go with Archer. It's ballistic, like literally, but regardless of whichever you choose, you should be fine. There's no variety in the skill set that should make just about any situation work in and out of combat. Example, the very first time that I came across a locked gate, I could use my spring shield ability and granted a few times to test and see if my pawn could actually catch my intent with the move, but you know, it felt realistic, or at least it was sensible enough that it would take so many attempts to actually result in what I wanted it to do. And similarly in combat, despite what might feel like a limited assortment of skills, such perception will quickly change when you consider the terrain, the enemy types, the tactics that you can use, the synergy with your pawn's ability, the buff that you can get from them when they raise you, and a lot of other cool stuff. You can, for example, bait enemies to leave their lairs, to get them on a main road where other adventurers will be passing by. And as my pawn in the previous game used to say,
strength in numbers arisen.
And with your combined strength, you can take an armored Cyclops down. Well, it's cool, folks. I'm just a supervisor. You're all doing a great job. Don't mind me jumping in here to steal all the glory, okay? Holy shit, she fake. Oh, Jesus Christ. What the hell is even that? A thing that I especially liked when it came to combat was the augments. They are like permanent upgrades that you keep no matter what vocation you were training them on. Meaning, for example, that if you go between fighter and warrior like myself, it lets you keep the augments from both. They aren't a new thing per se, but they do feel a lot better to use in this one. And also in combination with the passives. As an example, I'm not too sure if I had Shadowplay playing at the time because I was running at the time, because I was trying to test a different refresh rate between my monitors, but there was this moment where I was using a passive that allowed me to slow down my fall, at least cushion it, reduce the damage while falling in the same way that Captain America did in the Winter Soldier movie. And that was just something that I did like mid-combat with a lot of chaos going around me, and it was just like a visual feast to the eyes. To see not just the different system interacting with each other, but also how the animations were being executed flawlessly. Now, given that this is still a stamina-based game, finding the right vocation is never going to be easy, at least not in the early games. And if you, like me, tend to let your pawn's commentary get the best of you, to a point where you wander off and encounter an enemy that you were never supposed to in the early game.
Be wary. It is a foe we've not yet encountered.
Okay, let's try again. What the fuck? Yo, the dragon just... Yo, the dragon no-scope does and the ballista. You know what? I'm just gonna accept my fate now. I am not ready for this encounter. You will quickly find out that there are no best choices. The best choice all depends on a variety of things. The encounter, all those things that I mentioned before, even the night and day cycle and the terrain on which you're fighting on. And for all the faults that I tend to put on Ubisoft games for the way that they design their gameplay, and sometimes also the storytelling, one thing that they've always done right has been the way that they depict the games, like the levels. Especially when it comes to those set in the ancient world, the likes of Origins or Odyssey. Valhalla didn't get into too much because it became a bit too long drawn, but I hope you understand what I'm getting with this. It's about the way that the open world is laid. It doesn't only feel that way, but it actually is done with care. It might not have the color palette of Zelda or The Witcher, but much like a game like Elden Ring, if Elden Ring didn't have the best anti-piracy feature in the form of torrent and actually kept you grounded, this game did make me enjoy just walking around. And much like the first one, it is a game that is supposed to be taken in, not rushed through. It's a world that is supposed to be savored. Which is why it is so weird that you cannot savor this, often due to technical issues. I have continuously, especially in one city, Vernworth, the city that made me quit the game, where I quite literally couldn't do anything. I had FPS drop down to the 20s. Like, I have a powerful system, like, it should not even be a problem. And the issue was, of course, the inconsistency of it all, as in the outskirts of the world, even with massive amount of NPCs and a lot of effects going about everywhere, I was still within the range of the 60 FPS if I was playing on my little monitor. Once testing on the much more powerful one that I use for editing, I got way above the 120s. Like, it didn't make sense. It's so weird because I had to resort to go to Vernworth at night to do my business there and then leave the city. And the curious and kind of annoying thing is that if I didn't give the game some time and continue pushing through, I too would have been in the camp of people straight off giving misinformation about the state of the game when it came to the performance. I heard people saying things like the start area, the mines, and even the open world experiencing frame drops. Now, I'm not going to say that people's experience are not what they were, they might have been, but from testing, I think Digital Foundry did a test on that. It doesn't seem to be the case. Like, I played through the first intro sequence, like fighting the Gorgon and all that. None of that were prevalent. None of these issues were apparent here, and as I've mentioned, same thing went from the open world. However, the one thing that actually truly annoyed me about the game was the lack of a new game. Start game. So I can load from the last save, I can load from the last inn that I was in, options, the online store, obviously, so that I can check all of their microtransactions. The game is sitting on a mixed. It was actually pretty negative before because it was getting review bombed. But do you spot the thing that was missing there? Did you spot it? New game. That is completely gone. You cannot start a new game in this. And I think that is kind of bad. Not kinda, it's really bad. Because there are myriads of situations that might cause you to want to start a fresh game. Because again, in the way that also the previous game was structured, you can't just save scum. Unless, of course, you want to go and edit stuff from your registrar folder. This is not Baldur's Gate 3 where you can't just pull a save and say, okay, I did this correctly. No, sometimes even saving beforehand will not aid you because the autosave will lock you out of the option that you planned for. Example, earlier in the game you get an infiltration mission where you are allowed to go in one of the jails and talk with a councilman. If you do the grave mistakes of literally stealing from the jail and being caught by a guard, which is weird because every single instances literally allows you to go into people's homes and take items from them. But if you do that and the guard catches you, they will put you in jail and you will be given a key that allows you to break out of said jail, and if you try to break out, they will beat the fuck out of you and you will not be allowed to escape. Now, naturally, you can bust out of jail because there's a wall behind you. The problem with that, however, is that all the stuff that you would have acquired over a period of like 5 hours would have been lost, and you will not know that you need to go back to the entrance of the jail to find your items being put automatically back into your inventory. Nobody will know that. They will just leave the place and be lost. Equally as bad was a moment when I overheard the conversation between some of my spawns talking about a plague that is affecting them exclusively. If said plague starts spreading, you are likely to experience something similar to the corrupted blood plague from World of Warcraft. And now, if you are not a basement dweller, it is the equivalent of the coronavirus for that game. It's messed up, and if you cannot log out of it or do something with your pawn or restart a new game, you're going to have to deal with that. And those are obviously bad things. And mind you, I'm not saying this because I couldn't push through a game that has put me at a large disadvantage. Plenty of games have done that. The problem is that when the actual feature that allows you to start a game over is locked behind a paywall, that's when it becomes kinda sus, you know? Equally as sus is when it comes to the world. As I've mentioned, the whole thing about enjoying it, going on a stride with your pawns and listening to the conversation, them guiding you astray sometimes. Quite literally enjoying the journey is what the creator of the game intended to do with it. He wanted people to slow down the pace a little bit and quite literally goaded some people into doing the same thing. Yet still, when the addition of fast travel features are made, which is very weird. I've described overall the inclusion of microtransaction in any of these games to be super unnecessary, and people ended up loving the game still. It was avoided, they were completely unnecessary, and that's the thing about these things. They are unnecessary, they're just clutter and muddies the waters of what should have been a great game. Like for some people, right? I can ignore them, I cannot care about them, but some people very much take it the wrong way. But especially with this fast travel mechanic, when you include that there and your intent was quite literally meant to not have that or limit the ability to fast travel to make the game more enjoyable, it kinda sounds hypocritical. And again, these things are highly unnecessary. You don't actually pay for fast travel. Like if you pay, you get a placeable waypoint which you can fast travel to, in contrast to the static one that you can find in the cities. And provided that of course you get the materials required to be able to fast travel, that is. But then instead you have such things as the port crystal that you can earn in game that are also placeable waypoints. You have stuff like the ox carts that you can quite literally use at almost any time by the click of a button to just wait for the time when the ox cart travels, and it is literally fast travel included in the game already. So yes, these things are easily accessible within the game, yet it always will rub people the wrong way, and very much easily if they are riled up and do not have the time to look these things through, like I almost did during the stream, they start spouting some misinformation, as in there is no fast travel unless you pay. This is straight up misinformation being spread by people offset with DD2, which in turn of course also detracts from the more glaring optimization issues. And the same thing applies with certain items that you can acquire in the shop, like for example the wake stones, which you could get like in the plenty. I think there were 8 different variants or something, where I literally at some point logged into the game, right? And as I started playing, I stumbled straight up on the chest with wake stones, and I continued doing so through my playthrough. Like, these are not hard things to find. You can literally find them on the outskirts of a town, locked in a chest, which your pawn will direct you to. The whole thing that you have to do is to play the game. And this is the whole point that I'm making when I'm saying that this is deeply unnecessary to have in your game, because even the people who are against the argument of it's in-game so it shouldn't bother you will not care, even though you can literally walk outside after booting a game and find the item. It's odd to me. To sort of conclude this video, because I know that I've been rambling for a little bit too long here, a lot of game discourse today is unfortunately very based on subjective matters, on optics. For example, I've already seen people argue that no matter how they end up fixing this whole microtransaction situation, despite how good the game is, they do not want this to be Game of the Year. it has already soured their taste and they will not have this being. Because gamers are somewhat tired. A slew of bad releases and stuff that were expected to be good, built often on hype, has resulted in people not excusing the smallest thing even if it doesn't affect the gameplay. Nor even if it doesn't even affect the people who are developing the games. Because I think that became somewhat of a narrative that we also started taking into account as the last few years. The CEO of Larian Studios, who a lot of people I'm certain are going to be quoting when it comes to the situation, said this as his game became nominated as Game of the Year. "It's always the quarterly profit," he continued. "The only thing that matters are the numbers. And then you fire everybody, and then next year you say, shit, I'm out of developers, and then you start hiring people again, and then you do acquisitions, and then you put them in the same loop again. And it's just broken. You don't have to. You can make reserves. You just slow down a bit. Slow down on greed. Be resilient. Take care of the people. Don't lose the institutional knowledge that's been built up in the people you lose every single year. So you have to go through the same cycle over and over and over. It really pisses me off." While I fully agree with the statement that he made there as it applies to a lot of Western and sometimes also Eastern developers, it's not quite a scenario that we're seeing with Capcom. So when I see statements of, well, there are clearly some passionate developers who are having conflicts with some greedy executives, perhaps, but these very executives are the ones who've been raising their salaries for the last couple of years, rewarding the people making those amazing games for them and encouraging them to do even better, going so far as to increasing the starting salary for new workers by 25%, where existing employees were getting a one-time special payment and an average salary increase of more than 5%. Something that in this industry is quite literally unheard of and, pardon me, doesn't even make sense. Like, you can treat your workers well as making good games. Bullpucky, we can't have that. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic here, but this is the complete antithesis of the narrative that is being painted on Capcom right now. Now, I'm not so naive not to acknowledge that some of these moves are done to please the shareholders as well. But in the many reports that have been covering Capcom's lack of layoffs, they themselves have stated pretty clearly that they are doing this to help both their workers create a great work environment and also please the shareholders, which I would imagine as a publicly traded company sends a good message out to your shareholders. It also means to the executive looking back at you that, well, your workers are doing well, so are the performances of your game, thus they might be a bit more lenient not to actually push the actual predatory practices that we see out here in the West. Yet still, Capcom of course has their wrongs. Just like Nintendo, they have measures in the game that very much hamper not just their performances, and of course for those people who like to dabble in mods, ends up affecting it quite a bit, with for example DRMs. But when it comes to all the personal things, I do not believe that there is a weird intention made by the content creators that you've been following to try to dupe you into playing or paying for the game, because of the accusation that people have been receiving are absolutely insane. Like, sponsorship from Capcom? Really? Really? Like, I praise them for taking care of their workers, right? But these are the people who are making the games. Do you know what they do to QA testers? They are the ones who are actually being fired, okay? Like, all of the reports that came out, like from all of the reports that came out last year of the many thousands of employees that had to be laid off from the gaming industry, Capcom had like 30 people, and all of these were overseas employees that were doing such things like QA testing and localization, like translating stuff. They get the boot because they aren't important. So to once more conclude, I'm not saying that Capcom is the Cap God that we want them to be. They are making good products, they are making good games. The practices, yeah, you can argue about that, but that does not take away from the product actually being good. And if the inclusion of unnecessary microtransaction and quite useless microtransactions are deterring you away from playing the game, that is absolutely fine. But I don't think that the inclusion of these things, which they've been practicing for now close to a decade now, is the thing that is going to ruin the overall experience for a player. I doubt that. But that's just my thought on the subject. I will give you an actual review in the coming weeks. I have to finish the game and play. Excuse me? Wow, it's the first time that I burp on camera. That's a new one. I apologize. I will give you a review that is a lot more fun with all the crazy stuff that I've experienced so far. It's gonna be interesting. But yeah, all I gotta say is that if this is deterring you from playing the game, it's fine. Wait, especially for the patch to come out by Capcom that will fix some of the issues in the cities. Everywhere else, it seems to be running fine for me, okay? Personal experience. I might give you a link down. Oh, yeah, great. They actually have this. Gamers Nexus just uploaded a video on the performance that they've tested. They are a trustworthy source for me. So yeah, I will leave a link to that as well in the description below. Also, don't forget to check out that Strife Hayes video if you would like to have a little bit more information on the whole pay-to-win thing that might be informative for you. That being said, I think that Dragon's Dogma 2 is a great game, and if you want to try it, give it a try. But until then, wait for my review. Anyways, guys, wish you all to have a wonderful day. See you guys in the next one. Bye.